Hello, welcome to another episode of Free Your Mind with Dr. Sheena Mason. This episode features Brittany King from American Shade. The first part of this conversation is over on her channel, the link to which will be in the description box. A little bit more about Brittany. Brittany Talisa King is a freelance writer and journalist. She has a YouTube channel and podcast called #AmericanShadewithBrittanyKing, which explores American racial issues and topics from her heterodox point of view. She graduated from New York University, receiving a master's in journalism, specializing in cultural reporting and criticism in 2019. Additionally, she studied under writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, which broadened her scope on journalism and the art of language. She has been published in The Republic, The Daily Beast, Washington Square News, Forward Magazine, Fractal Magazine, Tablet Magazine, and is a featured writer on Medium. Enjoy the conversation. Brittany, let's
Yes.
define race. Like, how do you define race? I feel like words like race, racism, we often take for granted that we mean the same thing, that it's like a fixed thing that we're talking about. How do you define race?
Yeah, that's a good point. First, that's a good point because race and racism and all these terms are like everyone has their own definition. So I'm glad that we're like clarifying what we think it is. So my short answer is race is a structure that sorts people into color categories based on their skin color. And the structure of race doesn't care about who a person is, it only cares about what you look like. So, which is to say, like, race doesn't care like if someone's Scottish, it just throws them into white, or it doesn't care like if my brother-in-law is from Kenya and I'm from Indiana, it just throws us into black. So I see it as a structure based like solely on skin color. That's how I define race. How do you define it?
Well, thank you for asking. So I define race in, I guess, a much more complicated way because that definition of race has long since been disproven. The meaning of the word race itself has been under construction or reconstruction since before America was even a thing. Back in the day in early modern Europe, it used to mean family, it used to mean ethnicity, it used to mean nationality. It was definitely part of their class system back then. And so when chattel slavery started and people started operating in North America, the way that race started to be reconstructed again, all the way up until the 1670s, it didn't have to do with the things that we tie to the meaning of race now. And around 1670, when they started to have like anti-miscegenation laws and laws against helping escaped enslaved people, that's when white, black, the notion of being brown or even people of color, that's when those words started to get codified in ways that we now understand race as indeed being tied to skin color. So for me, race started out in the sort of natural way that you're describing it, but has since been disproven. And the vast majority of scientists today would say that race is a social construction. Now, it can be a social construction based largely on how a person looks. And I think in the United States, that certainly informs the social constructed nature of it. But for me, that's a more questionable definition of race because it is focusing on what is of nature. And we already know that race is not of nature.
No, I don't think I 100% see it as a social construction. I don't think race is like genetic at all. So I define it as how most people define it and see it now. Because I don't know, it's tricky, like you said, like people see race and define it in their own ways. But I try to go by how society defines it, because anyone can say, oh, scientists said this and this. But it's definitely not genetic. It's definitely not biological. It's something, constructed specifically in America, and the early 1600s. Like, so it's not anything that I believe is like, your skin color means like you're Black and that's your DNA. It's more like society has constructed it to be that if you look like me, then you're categorized as Black. And that, again, it doesn't care about what I even think or what I say. They say, Brittany, well, you're Black in America. That's how we see it.
Yeah. So that actually brings me to the next word that I want us to define, which is racialization. And I say it connects me to that because ultimately what you're describing, or how I interpret what you're saying, is that there's this sort of like social cultural happening that racializes people, and that's where what you say doesn't matter. When you're born, when you look a particular way, or your parents are who they are, whatever, you are racialized. And in that way, I would say that racialization happens two ways. One of the ways in which I really want to highlight and emphasize and focus on for this purpose, for this discussion, because yes, we're racialized by society and we racialize ourselves. And sometimes there's a difference, right, in how one racializes themselves compared to how society racializes them. And we see this playing out historically. I mean, there are some infamous examples that we could look to see discrepancies between how society racializes a person versus how they view themselves. So yes, I think it's definitely important and a critical part of my own effort to always point to what society believes race is, right? Which is largely influenced and inspired by phenotype and ancestry and DNA, all of the natural things that we've spoken about. But for yourself, like if you're sitting in the quiet of the moment, how are you defining it for yourself?
That's exactly how I define it for myself. I wrote a piece about our skin problem, and I define it the way I see it and the way I feel it's put on me. I didn't look up definitions for this. Like I looked up, I just thought about when I see this word, when it pops up, what do I think it means? So that's what I think it means. Yeah.
So your definition of race and what it is to be racialized then coincide with society's definitions in a way? Am I hearing you correctly?
If that's what you say, yeah.
I'm gonna edit
I
this
didn't
part out.
Edit what part?
Just if that's what you say, because I want to know what you say. Like, if
you don't have to. I don't think you should edit any of this out because this is like organic. Yeah. I mean, you said that my definition is what a large part of society, or maybe the mainstream definition is. If that's how you see it, yes. Like but you asked me what I think, and this is what I think.
Yeah, because you said, I guess that was my interpretation, because you said that you agree with society, but I don't want to be putting words.
I don't agree with society, but I see the reality of what society does.
Right.
I don't agree, like, yeah, I'm aligned. It's more like when I see race and I see myself inside race, what do I feel? And I feel like race doesn't care about who I am. Race just cares about how I look. It just cares about that I look African American, or that I look like, brown or whatever. So that it categorizes me into Black. I don't feel like great. That's why I actually called it in my piece, our skin problem, like the most superficial system. It cares nothing about you. Yeah. So that's how I define it. I think I don't know, like on a large scale, I would assume or guess maybe that's how society would see it on a large scale. I would love to know what other people think. Hopefully I'll get to see that in the comments, how people define it. Maybe I'm off. Maybe like, that's actually not how I see it at all. I see it as this or that. You know, I'm open to being wrong, but I mean, that's how I would define it. And racialization, I guess you're gonna define that first. I don't know. But I guess, do you want me to say what I came up with that?
Yeah.
Or no? Okay, so without looking at a definition, and just coming up with my initial thoughts when I saw this word, I would define it as the harmful action of stereotyping or negatively assuming an individual based upon a constructed racial bias. That's how, and this was way longer, like how I felt was way longer. But I took, you know, the notes from my former professor, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and he's just said, he would always tell us to make it as, if it could be a sentence, make it into a sentence. So I did, and that's the best way I could describe that word.
Say it again for me.
The harmful action of stereotyping or negatively assuming an individual based upon a constructed racial bias.
Interesting.
Ooh, that blow your mind?
Well, I guess the part that's most interesting for me now is having had what feels like countless conversations with you about these ideas. This lighting is like driving me crazy, but I can't avoid it. My window is right here. Yeah, after having had as many conversations with you, it seems like your own definition of race and your own definition of racialization are speaking to a lot of my central points about those very things, which I guess it's surprising me, but it's not surprising me because I've been telling you that there are times when I feel like we are more in agreement than is like readily.
No, I've been telling you. I've been telling you. I mean, yeah, we established that like our first Zoom. We see things differently, but 100%. That's why I think sometimes like the way you phrase things, the way I phrase things are like semantics at the end of the day. And like all these labels are just like another label to be. And it's like, for me, I'm like, at the end goal, I'm like, she wants people to see people's character, and like race is arbitrary. And I'm like, race is arbitrary. See people for their character and their individual. So I think you're seeing, like, I'm not shocked at all. I think more for you, it's being revealed that my mindset, even though I might not agree, or not, I won't say agree. I'm not going to say agree. I'm open to having it settle down more. But even though I don't subscribe, I guess, to racelessness, so to speak, I think our end goal is like parallel. Oh, yeah. So when you talk, I'm like, But it's just, it's strange for me that like, if I say like something, you, I don't know, it's like, I think we're saying the same thing, but you don't hear it the same sometimes, I feel.
No, the funny part is I do hear it, and it seems to be coming, like how you're articulating it becomes more clearly aligned with my argument, which then the surprise is how we still come to the different conclusions that we come to. Because if one,
Dr. Mason,
yes,
it's because we're not the same. We're individuals. We have different point of views, which we are proponents for. So I don't see the things the same way necessarily as you, and vice versa. And you don't have to. Like, if you don't see things the way I see it, but at the end goal is what I hope for America, and then I'm like, as long as she wants that end goal, I'm good. It's all good.
I mean, like, yes to all of that, right? But it's still a fascinating happening for me that people can recognize the same problem, name it in a way that's similar, not the same, but like similar enough, right? And then come to vastly different and I think ironic conclusions, because it is my stated position that the Reconstructionists, like, yes, we should have different ways and we're human beings, so we're going to think differently and we should. But I do think toward the goal of what I identify as liberation, we do have to have more than just the shared interests. Our strategies for how do we get there have to align more in order for us to actually make the progress that we want. Otherwise, we'll stay sort of, I don't know, like stagnant to a certain extent.
Yeah, I don't think we'll stay stagnant at all. I wonder if you're perplexed because perhaps racelessness is like another shade of Reconstruction. Like it's not as different. Like it maybe the way that you frame it and your theory is, I wonder if that's perplexing. And I'm sure we're going to get into philosophies that you broke down awesomely. And I learned a lot because I'm like, I'm these things, I have no idea. But I wonder, I'm like, is racelessness just like under the umbrella of Reconstruction, but maybe a more radical version of it? But at the same, so it is.
Yeah, it's Dr. Carter would tell you that it is a form of reconstruction, but the ultimate goal is elimination. But how do you get to elimination? It's not a overnight, like, bam, everything is done. You have to actually do some reconstructive work to get there.
I think that's the part that loses me, because in our part one in our panel, that if race equals racism, but you say racism can't be eliminated, then race can't be eliminated. That's how I see it. I see like logical math.
Yeah.
So so that's why I'm like,
yeah. So let's talk about this. Well, okay. So,
or do you want to go through the yeah, I don't want to, like, because last time we were like wanted to define these terms. Yeah. And so I don't want to like derail it. Okay. It definitely can come back, but I want to make sure like we do what you wanted to do.
Okay, we're coming back, folks. We're coming back to this
They're like, point. Come back to this.
Okay, so racialization. So here's how I define racialization, and Dr. Coates is going to be dissatisfied with my long definition. It's a definition that I had to work on for my book, and it's not a one sentence, like that's never going to happen, because especially
it did for me.
Especially when when your book is geared toward actually like educating people, it's got to be more than one sentence. So this is my long
my
answer.
sentence can't educate someone? What?
Not in the ways that a book works to, right? Like,
my definition
is different.
Oh yeah, podcast, I can't give a book definition. People will be like yawning. But anyway, go ahead.
Prepare to yawn. So so I write, let's see, where's a good place to start? Enslavement was not racialized in the ways many of us currently understand both race and slavery until approximately 1660, when various states began outlawing miscegenation, calculating Blackness, and passing fugitive enslaved laws. Over time and within the bounds of the peculiar institution of slavery, racialization came to describe the systemic practice of marking out groups of people as the subjects of violence and oppression based largely on ancestry and phenotype. Racialization reflected one's access to power, even if not one's possession of power. So indentured servitude was phased out in its formal capacities. The words Black and Negro came to describe people of African descent who are considered by law and practice to be enslaved and property. And the term persons of color primarily described free Black and brown people, and white primarily described all free people of seemingly visible European descent. So race shifted from referring to ethnic or national groups to describing subspecies of humans more definitively during the 18th century. And so this, to me, is what it is to be racialized, which is why thinkers like Dr. Carter at our panel discussion, he said, there is nothing positive about being racialized. This is the kind of like insight that he's speaking from and that I'm speaking from. And it coincides, I think, with your definition of racialization, because you bring in this idea of like bias and discrimination and prejudice, right? Which we could just redub as racism or racist ideas, right? And so in that way, racialization is what happens in a society that is, for all intents and purposes, consumed by race. and the idea of race and color. To be racialized is to live in a society like the United States, where indeed your skin color, how you look, your ancestry, all of these things influence and inform how people then racialize you and how you'll likely racialize yourself. But that racialization is not freestanding. It's not free from the systemic power or hierarchy that creates racialization in the first part. So that's how I tend to come to mean that racism is race, that race is racism. Really what I'm pointing to is racism creates and created race. And in that way, to tell ourselves that after the centuries and centuries and centuries of that being factual, and something that I don't think either of us would argue against, that it can be anything else. And I would like to, I hope I'm wrong. In the spirit of being proven wrong, I hope I'm wrong. But I think that if we look at history and how we've constantly been trying to reconstruct without the goal of elimination, at least not without the expressed goal of elimination, then we can see that indeed it's a harder battle, because like how it was conceived of in the first place and then how it was applied through law and practice are kind of like the antithesis of what we're wanting. If that makes sense.
It makes sense.
So how do you define racism then? Is racism to your mind the same as racialization, or like where do you stand with that word?
Tricky question.
Yes.
Well, okay, so there's different forms of racism, but I think like the basic way I would describe racism is racially discriminating against an individual or a group based on their skin color and believing one's racial group is superior to another and acting upon it. Like that's how I would define racism. And then you can break that down. Like there's different forms like interpersonal racism, which occurs when individuals interact with others and where their personal racial beliefs affect their public interactions. And then systemic racism, which we talked a lot about, a deeply rooted prejudice combined with institutional power and systemic oppression of certain groups and people. So those two definitions I did look up because I didn't want to like be off, but that's basically how I would describe that. But of course, like it goes without saying, the racism is like the foundation of both of those. So yes, that's how I would define racism.
Yeah, so
even though I think most people, not most, I won't say most people, but and this is debatable, but people would often say, I used to say, prejudice plus power is racism.
right.
But the thing is like, in ways that it's true, but I think there's more, racism is more complicated. So, I mean, you can throw that in, that could be another definition too, but
yeah. I too used to do, I don't know that I ever like adopted that phrase, prejudice plus power equals racism, but I definitely defined racism based on one's access to power, or some kind of like imbalance of power. And so then that would preclude certain racialized groups from being able to be racist. And that was my pretty fixed belief up until I guess my doctoral work really helped me expand my thinking in a lot of ways and complicate it and interrogate it.
When was that? Sorry.
So I started at Howard in 2016 and I graduated this year.
Okay.
So, right. And then 2016, you might recall, that was also the same year that I lived in California before I came to DC to start my PhD. And I was working with BLM and stuff like that. So I definitely was of that mindset. But recently I've changed course. And I can't say that I've landed anywhere that I imagine being forever, or you know what I'm saying? Like I'm still constantly working to evolve my own definitions and understandings. But at least as I define it now, the critical connection between your definition and mine is this idea of action. So I say that racism refers to the practice the action of marking out groups of people as subjects or perpetrators of violence and oppression based largely on ancestry and phenotype, i.e. race. And then I say that racism then is a term often used by some people to describe the institutionalized or systemic prejudice caused by race, i.e. racialization. So for me, the word that I made up, that I coined, one of the many, is I pronounce it racialist. It's essentially combining the word racial and racist. And so I identify any upholding of race ideology, that which is racial, as also being racist. And so from that perspective, any person and every person can be in that bucket. They can move out of the bucket. They can be back in the bucket. You know, they can be like halfway in, halfway out. It's definitely a more fluid understanding of racism, but the action part is the part that I really am exploring more and more and more, because part of the problems I've witnessed in society and that I've experienced with my students involves this idea of why racism is bad or why it matters. And I think we talked about this in part one, so I won't do my best not to harp on this. But a lot of the hangups that I've seen and heard have to do with viewing racism as identifying like what ideas should be policed and what, you know what I'm saying? Like how we should police minds, as opposed to how we should pay more attention to how racism actually impacts and is like an action towards groups of people. And in that way, I feel like we'll never do as much as we can to solve racism, because we're focusing on the sort of racist boogeyman, the Karens that are running around, as opposed to what I think matters more, right? Which isn't the Karen running around. It's like, do you want people to be better human beings? Of course. But why I fight against systemic racism and why I insist on identifying it in meaningful ways is because of how it disproportionately impacts and affects people.
When you say the Karen running around, you mean like just the Karen, that mindset? Because the Karen is only a Karen when she's acting upon her implicit biases. So that's an action of racism.
It absolutely is. And while I would identify that as like a racist action, I think there's a distinction between, always a fruit fly torturing me while I'm at my desk and I can't catch it. It's a nifty little bugger.
It is the guest star of this.
Of the entire series. I feel like it's the same one that was here last time. So
it loves this.
So yeah, I see that as a racist action, and yet I would argue that that is not as important as identifying policies, procedures, institutions.
Yeah. I'm just going by your philosophy, because I'm like, when people say Karen, I automatically think like, okay, someone was acting out somehow, which I still have qualms with labeling someone. Well, that's another conversation. But whatever. But yeah, someone that has the mindset of, so you're saying like if someone just thinks like a Karen but doesn't act like one, that's not racist because you can't really tell. Like you don't know if someone's racist or has that mentality until they act it.
Right. Because
no one is a mind reader.
no one.
Well, actually, there are mind readers.
Unless you're Sylvia Brown.
Oh God.
That's like a really old school reference.
I know. That's why I said, oh God.
Myself.
I was like
dating myself. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think just like how you identify helping people be better critical thinkers as being a necessary part of the solution toward, I just think, like a better society in general, that speaks to this idea of people can have biases, but if they're not acting on them,
you don't know.
Then yeah, you don't know, and then does it matter? And like, I don't know.
Though those implicit biases will compile and compile and compile and compile to
Yeah,
where one day they could snap and it will come out.
yeah,
I don't think that you can have a bunch of harboring animosity or ugliness towards someone or a race group and die and never at all ever say a word or a little action against them.
yeah,
The work of critical thinking, which I do across the board beyond race, like with politics or just in general, like people just critically thinking and applying logical sensing into every aspect of their life is like in a way to treat the thing before you react, like get at it before it becomes something that fosters within you, flushes in within you, and then you do the thing. If you chisel it down enough, and then also be like, why do I think this way? Like vet your own ideas, vet why you even think this way about this person or this group. I think is individual work that is necessary. But I do get your point with if I'm sitting on the bus with someone and they might hate Black people, but they don't do anything to me, I'll never know. And I might even say, hi, how are you? Never know. But would it be awesome if that person would not just keep harboring these biases, but working to get them out of themselves? I think the latter is always the better option.
oh
But I
yeah,
definitely get what you mean, because we definitely interact with people who might otherwise think different with us, which is why sometimes, well, not which is why sometimes, which is why all the time, you might be that person that might get that person thinking about the very thing we're talking about. Like the person on the bus, I sit down, they're like, Black person. And I just start a conversation. Hi, how are you? Like, oh, where are you going? Oh, we're going to the same stop. And then they're thinking, oh, that was nice. That was a nice interaction. They didn't even know me. Maybe they'll go home and be like, okay, let me see why I even think this way. Because this person was nice to me. They don't know me from a hole in the wall. So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm tangent, sorry. This is your thing. But yeah,
No,
that's just my thoughts
yeah,
on that.
no, it's nothing to apologize for. I mean, I think that's important, but to your point, it's individual work, right? It's working on oneself, and one has to have the desire to like want to do that and to think differently and that sort of thing. And that's where I
Exactly.
feel like we have to have more. We have to be more focused, just as we've spoken about being more specific and precise with our language and what we identify to be racist or racism in action, right? We have to be more focused on the aspects of racism that would be, I guess, more meaningful to actually touch and change and lessen and influence. And to my mind, that is tethered to how racism manifests and shows up in society in systemic ways.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
Samuel would say, and those like who think like in that way would say, well, systemic racism doesn't exist. But I would strongly disagree with that assertion and say that systemic racism does exist. I've witnessed it. And in that way, that's why I care so much about working toward the solution.
So do I. And
Eh,
that's exactly what American Shade is doing.
do you
I am championing your work.
do you identify do you identify that sentiment, like what I just expressed and what you just essentially co-signed? Do you identify that as us being what's called anti-racist? Is anti-racist a word that you use in your like repertoire, or like how do you define anti-racism, if you do or even if you don't use it?
How do I define? Okay, so, and this is a question about like not racist, anti-racist, right? All right. So I think anti-racist is kind of hard to use now because how it's been stigmatized and tainted by Kendi. And first off, okay, because I have a little thing to say about Kendi. I hope that's okay. So according to him, there is no such thing as not racist. You're either racist or anti-racist. I know in his prose and his lectures, he says that there's only anti-racist and racist, and one might express that they're not racist because they're actively trying not to marginalize another group, like let's say the Ku Klux Klan. But he believes a person who says they're not racist uses the term like camouflage and are still racist, because to him, you're always active within the fight for race. You're either actively fighting against it, which is anti-racist, or you're actively for it, which is racist. But he says the action of being neutral is also racist because you're not doing anything to deconstruct or dismantle racism or white supremacy, he would say. So basically, you know, he's created this binary opposition where racist and not racist fall on the same sides. And I definitely do not agree with that. And I'm not a part of the Kendi club that bashes him online, but I did do a video, you know, challenging these terms, his ideas. I inserted Coleman Hughes' essay critique that he did on American Shade. Check it out, plug. And also Coleman and I have had our own like conversations about Kendi, but his terms essentially have categorized all Americans into being racist or anti-racist, bad people, good people, not to say racist people aren't bad, but the question still stands on why he gets to term these words, and why we have to, and why he gets to like dictate what it means based on his opinions without even engaging into, you know, public discourse. For me, not using his definitions, anti-racist and racist and not racist, is that the same thing? Like, are you and I just not racist, or are we anti-racist? And I'm still like grappling with that. I'm wondering if it is a spectrum of how to be anti-racist. When I think of anti-racist, I'll just give this example. Dr. King, anti-racist, actively gave his life to fighting racist structures in America. That's different than the average person that's just not racist. So I don't know if there's like a distinction where we have to term people like that, or if there's a spectrum of how to be anti-racist. I do consider both of us anti-racist because I do consider us doing work actively against racism, even if it's not exactly the same, which I think we both kind of agree it is kind of, but like, even though it's not like exactly like American Shade isn't raceless or Theory of Racelessness, but we're still actively trying to chip away, completely gut this problem that has happened and come before us. So I think like we would be anti-racist. Do I use it? For me, no. I don't say I'm an anti-racist. I honestly don't, because I try not to label myself as much as possible. I think people get lost in labels and people just become archetypes the more people have labels on them. So I am against labels. But I do, that question that you posed, this was like one of the hardest ones to answer, because I'm just like, I don't know. Is it a spectrum? I don't know, because I don't use it. It's not in my lexicon to call myself that. Now, I do understand the anti-racist movement, the mainstream one. I do think they mean well, and there's good people in there that really are trying to fight racism, who really are, and not even fight it, like end it. But the thing is what Kendi's ideas have done and these terms have done is created chaos within that movement, not the whole movement, but the sections of that movement, because people are like, well, I have to always be doing something or I'm racist. And it's created like this neurotic environment where people expect perfection and no iota of racism anywhere. And that's a problem because there's no such thing as perfection. And progression is just not good enough for people anymore. And so, yeah, that term should always be good. Like when I see the term, I should feel good about it. But when I see the term, I just think Kendi, 100%. Even though I wrote a piece on Dr. Martin Luther King taught us how to be anti-racist, because I want that term to be taken back. But at this point, I'm just like, if I describe myself as anti-racist, people are like, oh my gosh, she's a part of Kendi, like, and there's no time to explain. People just go off with that. But that is a very long explanation to your question, but I had to get that off my chest because,
no, thank you.
Yeah, because it's hard to define that when someone has kind of co-opted it, I'll say.
Yeah, no, we definitely, I think, do agree on across the board. I mean, I have a few qualms with Kendi myself. And ironically, I'm starting my assistant professorship at a school that he was at for like 4 years, right before his career really started to take off. So I feel like it's like very coincidental, but also not. It's like the universe working its magic. And
I almost went to, just inserting this, I almost went to Boston University instead of NYU. So I would have been there, I believe, when he was
there.
teaching.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah, listen.
I'm not saying anything. It's just, more you know. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I do use the word anti-racism, but I do make clear, like if you go to my theoryofracelessness.org website, you see that our anti-racism is different from the anti-racism or what is understood to be anti-racism. And because of some of the ideas that he's espoused, for better or for worse, I do feel like it's more challenging for me to just like promote not racism or something like that, and sometimes I'll say, instead of anti-racism, I'll say against racism, but then it all just kind of feels a little icky and it feels like slightly problematic. It feels like definitely people can misconstrue what I'm communicating. And so to your point,
why would that be problematic if you say against racism?
Well, some of the pushback that I've heard is the word against is sort of like a trigger or has a stigma of its own, even when in the context of something that is as nefarious as I argue that racism is. And so all around, it just seems like, damned if you do, damned if you don't, in a way. And in my book and in my other publications and in my classrooms, like I do work to change, or I guess like expand how we think of anti-racism. But I too have my moments of like, maybe I just need not use that term to like describe myself or my work. And then it kind of makes me upset and angry because, before Kendi, first of all, I don't remember using the word anti-racism before Kendi. I felt like, I don't know if he coined it, but my mind is giving him credit for coining that specific term.
I feel like I definitely heard it before him, but I don't think it wasn't popular.
Right. It wasn't trending. Now it's trending.
Yeah. Now, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I definitely feel you. I'm on the fence, but there are, it's not even just his definitions or what one could say lack thereof, but also the ways in which he espouses ideas that do, from my perspective, run counter to what he's actually saying he wants to accomplish. And, Robin DiAngelo, I think we spoke about her in part one. She also is in the category of people that I feel pretty strongly about critiquing.
I did a critique on her too.
Oh, yes. You did? We're gonna put whatever links you want in the chat box. We're definitely gonna to include, because Yeah, I think people take for granted that because they have such prominence in the space of what's being dubbed anti-racism, that they are the exemplars, that their ideas have been tried and tested and all that stuff. But to me, I think it's pretty clear that their ideas have not been tried and tested, as Kendi refuses to even debate his ideas with anyone because he says if you disagree with any part of what he says, then you're a white
You're racist.
supremacist and you're racist. So it's like that to me is anti-intellectual, it's anti-movement in a lot of ways, it's anti-community. It just,
Yeah.
I'm not with it.
Yeah.
And that's why my book, Decolonizing the Racialist Imagination, an Examination and Critique of Anti-Racist Discourse, is exactly that, an examination and critique of what would be identified as anti-racist discourse,
Mm.
with the hope that we can fill in some of the gaps ourselves and work toward more progress toward like the goals that we actually share.
Mm-hmm.
That brings me to one of the things you said was about how progression just isn't enough for people these days, and people are expecting or even demanding perfection. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's one of my sticking points when it comes to this conversation and this type of dialogue, because the person that we were talking about earlier, definitely an archetype, not a real person, just like an imagining of a person who has racist ideas and stuff. That to me is sort of speaking to society's desire to force everyone to be perfect in ways that to me aren't only impractical but also unnecessary toward the goal, or what I think should be the goal anyway. And also it's like, also it continues to put this really negative stigma. I mean, stigma, that's a little redundant because stigma is something negative, right? It puts this
Mm-hmm.
stigma on what it is to be racist or have a racist idea, which I think only further lends toward deepening the divide and the problem. And that's something I hope to do through my efforts as well, as like to destigmatize what that is, because for all intents and purposes, you can be racist and still be a really great human being by most accounts, right? You can be sexist and still actually be a good human being by most accounts. So this idea that,
Question.
sure.
Could you give an example? This is for the viewers at home, the ones that might ask this. Can you give an example of being a good person and being racist? How that can happen at the same time?
Yeah. Um,
Because I don't know if you meant like, I try to get, still man, because I want to know, like, do you mean someone that's racist can just come across as a good, or there could actually be, they're good, like they're
yeah,
good
that
and racist?
that that
Okay.
part, because especially it's ironic to me because Christians identify themselves as sinners, right? Necessarily so, and that's why Jesus sacrificed himself for us, because we're sinners and we're not necessarily absolved of our sinning nature because we're human beings and so we sin.
Yeah.
But it's
Which
like,
is
it's,
exactly what I said.
yeah, in part one, this thread kind of came up for us, also, so it's making me giggle and smile because of how consistent we are. But the the idea that you can have some kind of bias of any kind, and that automatically means that you are a bad person and need to be canceled or whatever, deemed, dubbed a Karen and forever like ostracized and marginalized. That to me is problematic, because it also suggests that the people who are doing that pointing aren't recognizing their own problematic ways of viewing other people and perhaps even themselves. So there's one, culpability kind of gets shifted so that nobody's taking accountability in a way. But then also, it's often the end of the conversation. Like, there's no conversation. If I identify you as racist, then that's usually the end of the conversation. And then what good does that do? Because it doesn't really leave space for you to progress as in your thinking or how you view people or how you view yourself. There's very little space for that, because we would hope that the people who said something racist online, lost their jobs, we would hope that that might inspire them, right, to go do some research, maybe educate themselves in particular ways. But that's definitely not a guarantee. And if I'm that person, I'm probably going to feel more racist. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So, like,
Yeah.
it doesn't solve the problem. And I think that this idea that progression isn't enough for people is a crucial one in this dialogue, because ultimately what we really, the goalpost really should be one of progressing progressing how we think about any subject, any topic. It should always be a matter of progression. And we can't, like, I don't know about you, but I don't always learn a lesson immediately and just
Mm-mm.
just like that, like, correct course. Sometimes lessons are learned over like a lot of, hard lessons over time, right?
Yeah.
And so this idea that all of a sudden with racism it's going to be different, I feel like is a setup, because it's
Mhm.
only going to encourage animosity, it's going to encourage lack of compassion, it's going to encourage more divisiveness, and then the
Mhm.
problem, like, we're no closer to solving the actual problem.
Right. Yeah. And I think people are way too quick to label someone racist. And by calling all these different things racist, it's just like destigmatizes or desensitizes what actual racist acts are. I guess I see someone being racist, it's like, I think of it more of an action, because you said like racism is only racism when it's active, it's an active thing. And I think racist is active as well. So I would say like someone can be prejudiced and be good. I'm sure, I mean, everyone's prejudiced in their own ways beyond race, or, and again, have implicit bias in their own way. I feel like if someone's racist, like they're defiantly um, going, like that's how they just view people and groups, and they are part of the racism that is active. That's how I see racist. Now, is that to say like, oh, they can't be saved, throw them out? No. I don't think that's even for me, and especially something like I amplify American Shade, like someone that's racist to me, like that's not the end of the conversation. That's like the start of one. And it's because, again, we're going to bring in God. It's because of my Christian faith. And again, like how you said, like, even when we're saved, we're still sinners. So yeah, I wouldn't stop a conversation with that. And even I will say this, I'm not going to say who it was. I'm not even going to say the time period, but I'll say the time period. It was last year. Yeah. And it was when my channel was picking up, and I had a few people who reached out in a way that was shocking, but in a way it was something like that really meant something. But they basically said they were racist. And more or less, I mean, not just against Black people, but against many other different groups. And they said that a couple of my videos didn't save them. It just made them think a little bit more. And I have since talked to them, and, I can't say whether they're not racist anymore, but the conversations that we've had, the fact that they said it to me, someone that's not white, and we're expressing that, of course, I'm not going to say, this is the end of the conversation, or shut the laptop. No, that starts it. Like the fact that you're saying this to me and you're saying like my content's helping, I'm going to try to help and see, okay, one, where did this start? Like, why is this how you feel? Like, I'm going to ask all the questions. So I think I do get what you're saying though, and I agree, like people that point the finger act as if they are morally superior to everyone else. And I said that people like that are like moral monsters. Not to say you shouldn't hold people accountable. I'm not talking about people like that. I'm talking about the people that steadily always trying to nitpick at people's character when they have so many skeletons in the closet. And I will just say this and I'll shut up. But with the that whole scandal with the Vogue editor, she was like 27, and I guess she said like the N-word once when she was 17, like in a tweet, and then she said some anti-Asian comments again when she was 17, and she got fired. She's no longer the editor at Teen Vogue, and she was there for maybe 2 weeks. It turned out that one of the writers that were there that was at her neck the most, she said the N-word more than the other one did. And she didn't get fired though, but she was at her neck the most, and she also did the thing. So that's what I'm talking about. Like, people, again, obsessed with perfection, but they're often the ones that are causing additional harm as well, by wanting to cancel and saying this is racist and completely derailing the conversation away to, like what you said, actual systemic issues that plague us and has been plaguing this country for decades, centuries. And they want to talk about a Vogue editor saying the N-word once 10 years ago when they were not even, a senior in high school. So yes, you agree. People need to focus on what matters because I'm getting tired of it. No, I'm kidding.
No, we have so much to learn. And I will say the one thing that that you said that I took particular note of, where I'm like, aha, like that's the thing, is the idea that yes, if we are defining the word racist or racism as necessitating some form of action, right? Not inaction, but action, then a person having what could be identified as, you said, prejudiced thoughts or biased thoughts, like that there is, by definition, by our own definitions or my own definition, there is a distinction there. And that's an idea that I'm going to be thinking a lot more about, because another part of my thinking is like, I don't see too much value in having 5 different words to describe the same thing. We talked about this a little bit, like white supremacy, anti-Black, racism, prejudice, discrimination, colorism. Like, to me, it's just racism, right? But
with that, I don't think they're not all the same thing at all.
But what I was going to say is that I think that the majority of those things are, but I think that if we're going to define racism or racist as indeed necessitating an action, I don't think this is how Kendi defines it, but I know Barbara and Karen Fields in Racecraft, they define it this way, as an action. If that's part of the definition, then that does shift
racist is
the dialogue a little bit, because pointing to people and trying to guess what they're thinking in their heads, but they're not acting on it, that to me serves very little like purpose or value toward the goal of being not racist or against racism or whatever. And so that to me is like definitely a more meaningful distinction to make, because it can help people unpack how many people, at least in the US, do tend to think about racism, which is this idea that what's in your head, I mean, yes, what's in your head does matter. It does matter. But like, we can't control or assume or presume, you know what I'm saying? Like, what's in somebody's head.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we can't.
I get what you're saying. That's why I think, I won't say like you misstep. Well, maybe this is good for your book, but that's what I'm saying. Like, a racist is an action. Therefore, I was confused when you said they can be good. I'm like, how are they good if they're actively doing racism? Because you do it. But prejudice, you can be good and be prejudiced. Like I said, that man on the man on the bus could have prejudice against me, but he could be good and he could be, a great person. But if a racist was sitting next to me, they're going to be actively doing something where I'm knowing like it's showcasing their racism.
Right.
Because like I would think you would say like being anti-racist is an action, so racist has to be an action. So that's why I was confused by what you said.
I never answered that question though. I never did answer that question of can a person who is racist be good, or do I think they're bad? And because I was like,
that.
Okay, that they can be good.
No, that's why we started this because you said because you said I wrote it down. You said that
but then you asked for an example.
Yes.
Yeah. And I stand by that assertion. While we can bring morality into people who take racist action or participate in racist action, we can bring morality into the equation. But I still think that you can do messed up stuff and still be a good person. And I just believe that across the board. Now, of course, it's probably also that answer would be dependent on what the specific scenario is. Like if we're talking about the KKK and they're lynching somebody, then like probably if murder is happening and things like that, then that's an entire different conversation. But I think on a sort of lower level, more common happening that we see, at least in the media, like the people who are dubbed Karens.
And sometimes that's subjective too.
Do I think that they can also be like racist or express racism or act out in those ways if we identify as racism or not, and still also be good people? Absolutely. I think that, and I think you can commit a crime and still be a good person. So my thinking on that is complex and complicated.
Commit a crime and
I think there are people who are incarcerated who I could still look to and be like, you're like, that's not a bad person. Yeah.
I think it depends on the crime. I think if someone murders someone, they're not good.
Yeah, like I just said, but the majority of people in jail are not in jail because they murdered somebody, right? So, well, yeah, I think that the conversation of good or bad, the primary message that I want to share is that as much as we can expand the binaries of good and bad, and also like racist and not racist or against racism, I think the more that we can complicate those things, the better. So that's just the message I'm trying to communicate.
I understand, though pushing back. I'm kidding.
But not kidding.
What does like racism requires hate? Therefore, a racist has to have hate.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that it requires hate.
Okay, so why? How? I'm a student and I'm going to get your book. I want to know.
Yeah, I don't think it requires hate. I think it requires ignorance, and there's a difference. And sometimes that ignorance manifests itself in hateful ways, or ways that, or angry ways, or violent ways. And so it's easy to perceive those actions as being hateful. And like sometimes it is, right? But I think to say across the board that all racist action or racism in practice requires hate, I think that here's the thing. I think that if in identifying it as that being a sort of necessary part, I think it also makes it that much harder for us to work towards solutions, because just as you've stated how on American Shade, the conversation doesn't end. Somebody can express like, I'm racist, or I have these racist ideas or whatever, and you don't close the book on them, right? But the vast majority of people do and will, right? Like cancel culture, that's a real thing. People not being invited to cookout, that's a real thing. So I think the obstacle of overcoming racism in a lot of ways, or ending it, solving it, becomes that much more difficult if we tell ourselves that it is a matter of hate, because in some instances that might be the case, but I think ignorance is really the crux of it. Because as you've figured out, probably even before your channel, but definitely with your channel and your viewers who are like awesome and open, people, when they know better, they do better. And in American society, we are not taught a lot about the world, a lot about what it is to be an American. we are not taught these things often until it's too late, or we seek the information on our own, or we're in college, or some of us never learn, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a real thing. And that to me speaks to, when I say ignorance, I mean in the literal sense of just not being educated in particular areas.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, and that's solvable. Hate, on the other hand, is like, at least to my mind, it's less solvable. You can kill some people with kindness. That's a thing. I do believe that. But that's like a way harder mountain to climb, I think.
Yeah. I guess I see prejudice as more ignorance, and like racist is more intentional. Like you're intentional.
Yeah.
I definitely think that's how I see it, and that's how it's shown up in my life. But I don't think racist people are like irredeemable. That's right. The thing. So that's by saying they're not like good, I think is correct. They're not necessarily good, but there's a lot of times where we're not always good. And if you're being racist, you're not good. Same if I'm stealing something, I'm not a good person at that moment. I think that's more so what I mean. So if you're racist, and I think you should be held accountable, but you shouldn't be, the person on the other end shouldn't think like they're better than, be like, well, I'm not racist, so like I'm your moral compass. No.
Right.
But I'm definitely going to hold someone accountable and not call them necessarily good, but I'm not going to say you're evil and bad and et cetera, especially if you're coming to me and ask me questions about certain things. But yeah, it's definitely not in the house with throwing people out, because I like, that's not, yes, it's not conducive, and we all fall short. God says you might not fall short with being a racist, but like if you steal and you're greedy, you're also not a great person. There's levels to this. There's levels.
Yeah, I would agree that there are levels, and I also think people can just make a mistake, and like sometimes the action of something racist happening, sometimes it can be a mistake, and people hear the word mistake and think, oh, that's like diminishing or devaluing. Listen, like none of us are perfect. All of us are perceived as good or bad by other people for a variety of reasons that extend far beyond the confines of race, being racist or not being racist, or being against racism, right? Mm-hmm. People judge my morality incessantly because of my sexuality and all of that. So I say that to say that I think the less we can apply that kind of like moral judgment onto people, the more productive it could go. At the same time, I don't see it as always necessarily detracting from the fight. Sometimes I think it might distract from the fight, because again, people tend to think in binaries, which is unfortunate, but then that leads to a sort of closing of the book more often than not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there should be, well, I can't say for everyone, because not everyone will do it, and I don't think everyone has to do it, but for me, I just have given more just tolerance and grace to it all because of my past experience with a lot of other things we talked about in part one of the panel. I'm not getting into it now, but check those out, people, if you want to know. Teaser. So yeah, I agree. I think that I just think that there's just a difference, but that at the end goal of it all, people can change. Like that's the thing. People can change. You by you doing so, and we've seen it. And I misspoke when I said David. What's his name? I'm about to say his last name again. We know the Black musician who befriended 200 to 300, Daryl Davis. There we go. Daryl Davis befriended, all those Ku Klux Klanners, and now they're not. Like they were the most extreme racist, and they're not. So they're not racist. It's not like some label that you're always going to be. Anyone can change. You just have to decide. And that's what I hope. And that's what I know what you're doing with your platform and your podcast. And American Shade is a place for people to come and to have your mind challenged. Like really have your mind challenged. Like I hope that someone that stumbles upon one of my videos and they might think, oh, what's this girl gonna say? Assuming what I might say because of how I look or that I'm Black, and come away and being like, dang, I was totally off. That happened a lot with Brett Weinstein. My God, so many people tuned in. They heard, oh, former Black Lives Matter act. Oh, I'm gonna comment against this girl, and totally 180. They even put in the comments, I was totally off by what I thought she might say. And actually she's challenged me, or she's actually opened me up to not sweeping every person into BLM. It's actually, there's individuals in there. And that the same way that because I voted for a person, and this is what this person said, because I voted for a certain person, people sweep me under with, you know, those people, and I'm an individual over here, the same way they are, the same way. So yeah, I yes, challenge people, but always keep grace, because you're not perfect, and one day you're going to need grace too. That's what I always say. Yeah. And I actually get sorry, just one little tip. I actually get pushback sometimes by people thinking that I should cancel certain people, or certain comments that might be like, man, I thought this about Black people, but now they're like, oh, like this comment's, I'm like, this comment is kind of necessary, because I know a lot of people feel this way. They might not feel as bold to say it, but the fact that it's there, if they can see themselves there, and then I'm like, it might be a little shocking, but this person they're purging something that other people need to purge out. So anyway, Dr. Mason, I'm sorry. Tangents.
No, don't apologize. Truly, don't apologize. I, as you know, very intimately, I have the capacity to talk and then talk and talk and talk until I feel like I've communicated what I'm thinking.
That's why we have podcasts.
Like, yes, right, right, and that's why we write books and stuff like that. So we got a lot to say. So it's all
get it either way.
Good. So okay, so now I want to go into the philosophies of race, because this is something that we intended to go into in part one. Somehow we didn't make our way there, but through part one and in the panel discussion on your channel, I've used some of the language that describes the philosophies, and this will ultimately bring us back to something that came up earlier. We're really like, oh wait, let's like stay on plan and come back to this question of eliminativism. Race equals racism. If you can't eliminate racism, then you can't eliminate race, all that stuff. So this is going to bring us back kind of 360. So there are 6 philosophies of race. Every person holds at least 2 of these philosophies, even without having a name for it. And the philosophies ultimately speak to what a person believes race is, which is why we started at the outset defining race for ourselves and each other. And it speaks to what a person believes should be done with race. So the first category is naturalism. One can be a naturalist, which means that they believe that race is biological, that it is something to do with DNA, that it is of nature, thus the name. And even though it has been disproven, people are holding on to this idea, believing that at some point we're going to unlock the code that shows us that humans are broken up into subspecies. Now, naturalists do tend to be people who are also explicitly racist. So there's that. There it is.
That's what I caught. I caught that. I was like,
Then the second position is a constructionist position. So constructionism. If a person is a social constructionist, then they believe that, okay, I can see that race is not of nature, it's not biological, But because of how racism operates in society, race is rendered real in the same way that we think of gender as being rendered real as a social construction. Now, my pushback against social constructionists is that they often identify themselves as a social constructionist, but then talk about race in all of the ways that a naturalist would, which, from my analysis, has led to the unintentional upholding of the idea of race, which then means that we are unintentionally upholding racism itself as a system. So that's my pushback against social constructionists. But social constructionists like Dr. Carter, I mean, it is what it is. Like, social constructionists are aplenty. It really is a default position in American society, especially. I think in a lot of ways we are taught through various forms throughout our lives to view race as indeed a social construction. But then ironically and paradoxically, we talk about it as it's of nature. And then the last category that speaks to what a person thinks race is called skepticism. Now, racial skeptics, or skeptics for short, argue that, okay, race does not exist in nature and it does not exist as a social construction. What people identify as race is really this other thing, or this other thing, or this combination of these other things. So we are misidentifying something and calling it race, but it's not race. So race exists in our imaginations, but that's about it. Mm-hmm. And I am a skeptic, formerly a constructionist, but as I've gone on this journey, my thinking has expanded, and I realized, like late fall, shortly before I defended my dissertation, I had a sort of aha moment, and I said, wait a second, because I never really understood this skepticism philosophy. Mm-hmm. And then I had this aha moment where I was like, oh, this is what it means to be a skeptic. And then I realized I was one. And then there are three categories that speak to what you think should be done with race. So the first of those categories is conservationism. Sounds like what it is. Conservationists believe that race should be conserved in some way, shape, or form. Usually, like, all naturalists are going to be conservationists, right? Because you cannot change something that is of nature. So they're going to be conservationists. The second category that speaks to what you think should be done with race is Reconstructionism. So most social constructionists end up being Reconstructionists, which I believe is the second default position in American society. The idea of Reconstruction is, hey, we've been handed the cards that we've been handed, but we can continue to reconstruct race to mean something different, to exact less violence, to be more positive. We can keep reconstructing it. So in contemporary society, examples of reconstructive efforts would be things like the hashtags Black excellence, Black is beautiful, Black boy joy, Black girl magic, anything that is an explicit reference to race and something positive, right? That's it. Those are examples of reconstruction. And then the last category of the six, and the last that speaks to what you think should be done with race, is eliminativism. Now, eliminativism is, in some ways, it's foolishly named. I don't know who first named the philosophies of race. I did not create the philosophies of race.
When was this constructed?
Yeah, like when the philosophies of race have existed really since, before the United States was founded, but the names of these six philosophies and these particular identifications, I'm unsure as to the origins of that. I can just say whoever dubbed this philosophy eliminativism did all eliminativists in the future a disservice. And here's why. So if you are an eliminativist, which I am, you argue that for whatever reason, the idea of race ideology, as I call it, race language, all should be eliminated. Now, the reason I am an eliminativist and a skeptic are in part because I recognize that racism masquerades itself as race in society. So the thing that we identify as being race or racial are actually cultural, national, ethnic, basically everything except what we identify as racial, and that what exists in actuality is racism. So in that way, I disagree that race exists, but yet I have eyes and a mind of my own. And so I study this, like that's my expertise. So I recognize that people believe that race exists. But again, because I recognize this race, racism, evasion, the thing that really exists for me is the racism aspect. Whereas the race aspect, we just imagine to exist, but really it's these other things. So when I start thinking about eliminativism and I say, well, we cannot eliminate racism completely, as in from where we are to 0%, right? That's because that I'm living in reality. Like I recognize that as human beings, we will not agree. All of us will not agree on a single thing, much less this thing 100%, right? Like that's quite literally, that's never going to happen. And probably shouldn't, although it might make some aspects of life easier if we could, but that's not how this thing works, right? So in that way, I recognize that we cannot eliminate racism completely, but I do believe that we can lessen it to the point where the majority of us, the statistical majority of us in America, are teaching the idea of race as a historical concept as we do a deep analysis of the history of racism. And that to me is the ultimate goal. So in that way, the idea of race would stop to persist, but I think that at least it would stop to persist in the dominant ways that it does now, but that there will always be some people who perceive what they think is race and have bias toward that thing that they identify as being racial, right? Mm. And in that way, if they then act on it, to our earlier conversation, you know, if they then act on that bias, then racism can still exist. But I don't think it has to be systemic forever. Again, I didn't dub it eliminativism. It's sort of a misnomer in that it implies that a person thinks it can be gone completely, which is not the case. And I don't even think that should be the goal for a lot of reasons. I don't even think getting rid of it altogether should be the goal. Probably just because I don't know, I see some kind of conceptual error in thinking in absolute truths, just as I see conceptual errors in thinking in very binary fixed ways. And for me, it's like an acknowledgement of, yeah, we're not aiming for utopia, right? We're not aiming for paradise. Fruit flies back. He likes this part.
You said utopia.
Yeah, we're not aiming for utopia. We're not aiming for paradise. I think that's important to communicate to people. Like that's not my goal. And I don't think it should be any of our goals, because we know how that can turn out in society.
Extreme.
So, yeah. So based on these 6 philosophies, Brittany, so I would say some categories are mutually exclusive. Like one is not going to be a naturalist and a reconstructionist or an eliminativist, and one is probably not going to be,
yeah, I know what you mean,
a conservationist and eliminativist.
After reading these, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Or hearing you. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, which 2 positions do you feel like you're most aligned with? And also I'll say too, that one can be a partial something, like a partial skeptic or a partial constructionist. Like that's a possibility too. So we're going to expand the categories. So yeah, where do you see yourself currently?
So after watching your video where you explain this, and then hear you again. I'm actually going to go through each category and say and reveal. I'll reveal what I am, and then I'll reveal like the ones I'm not. So naturalism, no. That's it. No, I'm kidding. No, I do not think race is literally biological, and I do not hold hope that this can prove like there's a genetic difference between each race. So I said absolutely not. Skepticism, I said maybe. I said maybe, because I don't necessarily think race is an illusion, but then I start thinking more and I'm like, well, I don't think that it's biological. I think it's societally engineered. So is that also thinking it's an illusion? I'm like, perhaps. So I was waiting for that. So that's why I said maybe I'm a hybrid between being a skeptic and a constructionist. And I said with the constructionism, I said, okay, I agree with this because how race operates in society makes it real, heavy quotes, simply because society labels or categorizes me as Black because I have brown skin, or I'm African-American, Black American. And the fact that before I can even speak, when I'm born, it checks me off as Black on the birth certificate. So I said, it's seemingly real, but seemingly implies illusion to me. So I'm a hybrid, maybe a hybrid between those two. So that's for that. The next, I'll do the same thing here. With being a Reconstructionist, I said, well, I had stars there because I'm like, maybe. Since society ultimately calls the shots on classifying people into racial categories, I do think it's vital for people to take individual actions to reframe how they might implicitly judge people within those racial boxes. And I said, because I fall into being a constructionist and a skeptic, which is to say I inevitably view race as real in a sense, because society treats it that way, means it's that race itself might not ever be eliminated, but I do see that we can definitely substantially change how we view people in race. I mean, obviously, conservationists, I laughed. I said no. I don't think the race structure itself is beneficial to society. Also, I don't think that we need to conserve the idea of race as it stands at all. I think we need to challenge it and dismantle it. Finally, and I love that you said like this was badly named, because I'm like, eliminativists, I love saying it though, eliminativists, I don't know why I love saying it, but I was like, because of our conversations, how you said like racism can't be eliminated. So I again was like, okay, I don't agree with the name or like elimination aspect, but I said people that would align in this philosophy would be more so aligned with what I'm for, which is that race is arbitrary, like I said before, and that we need to judge people's character and not their skin, and do as best we can to do that. But for me, again, I say we won't be perfect at it. Therefore, that's why I didn't check eliminativist, because I don't think that will be eliminated. And I don't think race will be eliminated. And I don't think racism will be eliminated. So then I just fall back on probably Reconstructionists with a dash of the third one. Because I'm like, this is aligned with what I want. But then I noted, which you've already taken care of. I said eliminativists sounds probably the most attractive out of the three, but I see it more as like ending racism, which is noble, but it's not realistic. But by you saying like, okay, this actually does a disservice to what people here think, makes way more sense. So I'll just clarify for people, hybrid between skeptic and constructionist, and I guess Reconstructionists, and probably maybe a hybrid between Reconstructionists and eliminativists with a different name than So yeah, that's what I see. And I love that because I never heard of these terms. I've heard of a couple of them, but I never heard of like naturalism and all that. Like, but I thought it was fascinating. I was like, but could it ever be possible for someone, okay, this is what I'm saying. like, and this is just two questions, because, you know, in the Q&A, when you're doing your book, you're going to get people ask these questions. So I'm just going to ask. But you say that race is an illusion, right? If race is an illusion and race equals racism, is racism an illusion?
I'm laughing. I'm sorry. Because yeah, like if you follow the logic, but like the more you engage with the knowledge that I share in my book and my podcast, you will come to see how
I can't wait for the book. I need to know.
You and me both, because I'm just trying to. I have the chapter and conclusion to finish, a couple of edits, and then I'm sending the final thing to them. Because if I hang on to it for too long, I'm going to learn exponentially in between and try to make even more changes, and I'll never finish it. So yeah, okay. Here's the thing, right? So I guess part of what I'm saying is when I say something like race is an illusion, what I'm really saying is what society identifies as race is not race. So what I mean is we often conflate race with ethnicity and culture, at least in American society we do. And that the things that we would point to or even describe using race language or racial language is actually cultural, it's ethnic, it's national, etc., and so on and so forth. So in that way, I identify race as an illusion. And then the thing that I identify as as racism masquerading as race, when I say that, then what I'm really saying is, or what I'm really pointing to, is all of the ways in which people are racialized and the ways in which people conceive of race that we started this conversation with at the outset as being inevitably, if not just more often than not, a negative thing. That in that way, that's what I'm pointing to. And I'm saying, see, this thing that we're calling race is like really racism hiding its face from us. But the thing that I feel like society at least in part points to and says, oh, but this is also race, which is like all of the positive things we could say about being racialized as Black and so on and so forth. That's the stuff where I'm like, that's the illusion. Because for me, that's not race. That is something else. It's not racial. But we tend to racialize all of these like different parts of who we are, and then it's hard for us to untangle it. And then it's like such a personal, often difficult journey for us to do the untangling, because we can feel, you know, race pride, we can feel power through the race that we identify with. And those are the kinds of happenings that I point to as being an illusion, because yes, those things have practical and even positive utility and have helped racialized Black people, especially in this country, survive and even thrive. But I think that idea that is race or racial, that has carried us as far as it can. And that we would be better serviced now to recognize the differences between race and ethnicity or nationality and culture and all that stuff. And the similarities between all those things as well, you know, and to really like let go of what race actually is, which is racism. And that to me is a matter of life or death.
I'm confused. Am I eliminativist? Because like I said, part one panel, sorry people, yes, we're referring to this because we want you to watch those things.
Yes.
Therefore, we don't have to explain it here because this will be 10 hours, literally. But like I said, I don't identify with my racial identity. I'm within my ethnic identity. So this might be like the mic drop. Have I indirectly erased race from myself? That's what I'm thinking, because I'm like, I don't racialize myself. Like I don't actively like you said, like with race, I don't see a positive thing within race, which is why I am like, my ethnicity, that's what I'm about, that's what I'm for. Again, like I said, like race is arbitrary, it doesn't care what you are. I care what I am. That's why I don't identify with my racial identity, because that happened without my consent. I'm more interested in someone's German heritage and their Scottish heritage than them just being white, because that's not something they did. That's something that was done to them. And I hope the same people feel the same with my Black American heritage, which we got into why that's an ethnicity, again, part 1 and part 2, or well, panel. But yeah, like now I'm like, maybe that happened. Maybe that just happened. But also you did make a good point. I think in the panel you said this, or part 1, you said like you can be in a place and also trying to dismantle it. Was that you?
Oh yeah, Dr. Carter said it and then I repeated it.
Okay, Dr. Carter. Okay, that must have been the mic drop, because that was a mental note, which I really like, and I think definitely is something that I subscribe to, that I can. Okay, I'm gonna say this, and I'll fix it up if it sounds whatever. But like how I was very, 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 I racialized myself when I was doing certain work, and that I thought was liberation work, which in ways it was. But in other ways of how I was looking at myself wasn't liberation for me. That's a better way to put it. So now I see people still in those spaces, so to speak. But I'm not the thing. You can be where you are and dismantle it, or you can meet people where they are and get them to recognize that maybe the way that they're operating in the world isn't conducive for them or conducive for the goals that they want. So I'm struggling to figure out if that makes someone like me eliminativist or whatever that is, or reconstructionist, because I think both are true ish. Like if elimination isn't a part of the last one, then okay, I can see that being realistic. But if the person who termed this and put meaning to it meant no elimination, then I don't know how or why they could come up with that idea. I guess I'm struggling with that.
The theory of racelessness. That's a better way to put it. So my theory of racelessness, right, kind of in some ways solves that quagmire in a way. The idea of racelessness from the theory of racelessness perspective includes the skepticism, which is to say, okay, race doesn't exist, right? We imagine it exists. So we're raceless in that way. But then racelessness also speaks to that being the expressed and desired goal. And again, it's unfortunate because with most ideas and things, it's hard not to hear something, especially pertaining to a solution, and feel like or wonder, okay, and maybe get a little hung up in like, okay, but is this something that's like, is this a zero sum? Is this an absolute? And if it is, then of course I think we would be like, of course we're going to be skeptical. I think we should be skeptical of anything that's like kind of presented in that way. But yeah, like for me, I can't speak to what the creator or the person who coined the term and identified it and sort of like defined it. I'm sure through like extensive analysis and research of philosophies. Was it a misstep to call eliminativism? Probably, but my eliminativism is mine, and and Dr. Carter's is his, although we agree on virtually everything except the constructionist skeptical part, right? But that doesn't prevent him from seeing absolute value and truth and validity to my skepticism. But the eliminativism aspect, I think, across the board, just like with the other categories, is different for every person in reality, because some eliminativists, listen, I identify Candace Owens as an eliminativist, but her form of eliminativism for me isn't, it's not my cup of tea, because I feel like she diminishes and devalues the persistence and existence of racism. And so in that way, we might both be eliminativists, which means we do share that goal, which means something, right? But we're getting there in very different ways, right? In ways that can be antagonistic toward the other. So I would just say that your recognition that you're racialized, and it's not so much you're racialized by society, and you can't choose that, but you can choose if you racialize yourself, I think speaks volumes to me, and is like, if people learned nothing else from me, that would be the one thing that I would want people to take away just in conversing with me or viewing my videos or reading my book. Because just because society decides something for you or tries to, that they want us to think that we don't have the power and the agency to choose differently for ourselves. But thinkers like Frantz Fanon, would say that we absolutely do have a choice. And we have the power to ultimately decide what labels get applied to us and what doesn't. And if the vast majority, statistical majority of people decided this isn't for me, it is my sincere belief that the ways of the land would change and align with and reflect that majority. But right now, because we live in a racialist society and we're kind of taught to think within the confines and context of race and being racialized, it often prevents more of us than not from being able to think of an alternative or imagine an alternative or seek out an alternative. And it prevents most of us from not checking the box. You know what I'm saying? Like changing the census, like not making race be a category that is given so much weight.
And I mean, I hope this is like I don't know if this is a 360 to part one, but that was literally like me saying that was literally in the 30 minutes of part one when I was expressing this to you. Because, and I'm glad we're getting to it now, but I mean, I've been like this for at least when I've been working on my thoughts, so to speak, de-racializing myself for 2 or 3 years. Like, this isn't anything new. I'm glad that this has been inserted in conversation, but this has happened way before this conversation when I've met you. Like I said before, I am a proud Black American in my ethnic sense, but I do not at all operate within my racial identity. Therefore, what I said before in part one is I don't racialize myself, and being Black is mine. The way that you and Dr. Carter have expressed the way that you're eliminativist or social construction is your way. And the way that you express Candace Owens, like her being a eliminativist is her way, or that you even said right now, your hopes is like, if anything, if someone doesn't come across or come away with your theory of racelessness as like a raceless person, if they at least don't racialize themselves, then that's good enough. Or that's positive, I think that's what you're saying. But for me, I don't. And so that's why I felt like we were saying the same things all the time in a way, because I'm like, I don't racialize myself at all. It's done to me. And I push back on that because of my ethnic identity.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, nope, this racial barrier or this thing, I don't care. Like that, you can't racialize me and make me think I can't do something because I'm my skin or because you said I'm Black. Like my heritage says otherwise. I can literally do anything. Like Malcolm says otherwise. Like he literally didn't care, and he was born in a place in a time that literally impossible odds were against him. He did things. So now I'm like, no, I'm not racialized. I'm not, I don't see my skin as a stumbling block. I see it as a flex. Like
Yeah.
I see it as something to only be proud of. I had a question, but I literally forgot it. I made a note and I'm like, what does this note mean? I'm like, what? So yeah, I just love that you recognize that and saw that, because that's what with the race identity, like I told you, I'm not a proponent for race, but I guess being a skeptic and a constructionist, I see it as a reality and an illusion, but a reality that an illusion that society has bought into that is real.
Right.
And therefore, because society says this illusion is real, so therefore everyone, and so instead of being like trying to challenge society to be like, no, this is an illusion, we got it, I'm like, okay, let me go underground, like how Kadeja and I were talking about how we might get at it at a micro level and a local level and get people to challenge their biases and get people to challenge why they think the way they think because of race, get them to see that race is arbitrary. Therefore, maybe then by going at them there at the ground level, they will eventually see it as an illusion. But I think it's a lofty goal to first to get people to see an illusion when they've saw this thing, it's so normalized and not even a thing that they even necessarily think about day to day, so to speak. But now everyone thinks about it because it's in the news all the time. Anyway, so yeah, I see it like getting at people's implicit bias, because that's an illusion. Like the fact that you think that these things are real because I'm Black, you don't know me at all, but you assume this stuff on me because you're racializing me because of all this. So yeah, I think this is a great 360 of seeing like you're coming at the problem from up here and I'm coming from it more on a ground level, I think. But in my eyes, like I said in the panel, chiseling it down, I think there needs to be multiple people getting at this thing at multiple angles and not at the same angle. I think like your goal of theory of racelessness is great, and to get at it there, because maybe people would be more apt to want to go and think where you are, because they might be sick of these conversations about implicit bias. They're like, no, I want to actually talk about this thing. And then other people are like, actually, I'm harboring something and I need to talk to someone about this. And I can be like, come over to American Shade, let's talk. And you're like, come to Theory of Racelessness when, you want to talk about the illusion of it all. So I think getting at it at all the angles actually will make it go away quicker, not go away quicker, but not be as massive as it is right now. That's why, which I don't think any of us are doing this. I think we're just in conversation with each other at this point and hearing each other out. But I'll just say, for someone that would want to be more subscribed into Theory of Racelessness, I wouldn't persuade them to come over and be like, no, you have to. I'm like, no, go. Like that's getting at the end goal. Like if that's the route you want to take it. If that's where your heart is, take that route. But the people that want to go here, go here. And if you want to go there, that's fine. Because all of this is working together for good. I don't see this as negative, because we both think race sucks. So, and race is not real. It really isn't real. But society loves those illusions, I guess. So yeah.
So this brings us kind of 360 in more than one way, because at the outset of today's dialogue, you mentioned something about like wondering if this is a question of semantics, or a different way to put that, is it a question of rhetoric? And that's something that I hear often, not often actually, but I've heard it enough to like.
Can you refresh what because someone might not know what you mean. I know what you're saying, but like someone might be like, what?
Yeah, so I mean, at least so you said it, but my interpretation of that and my understanding of what people are asking when they're saying that is like I'm pushing to change the language of how we talk about things, but
Oh,
our goal is ultimately shared. So isn't it just a question of semantics where Brittany or any person might be speaking a particular way about the same issue with the same goal in mind compared to me, who I'm speaking in a different way with the same
yeah.
issue in the goal in mind, right? And so
I
then
think what
the
I
question becomes, is
oh
it
I
a question of semantics?
yeah. I was like semantics with reconstruction because I said like is reconstruction or is racelessness um because it's not a goal to eliminate or can eliminate, and you said it can't really, and that shouldn't be the goal, that reconstruction also doesn't eliminate anything. It just reframes it to not be, as I think you said, nefarious as it is. So that's why I said, is it semantics?
Mm-hmm.
Because one isn't doing anything different in my eyes
Yeah.
than the other one.
Yeah, so I definitely want to speak to that, because one of the places where we agree, it's like I always have some amount of trepidation to like say certain words, but like we definitely agree on a lot and on really foundational stuff. But the part where we do differ, that for me is a meaningful difference of perspectives, is the fact that although you identify being racialized and as not a positive thing, and you identify race as being like imagined, illusion, but also real, renders itself in a real way, thus your partial identification, um, that you view your ethnicity, you view Black as your ethnicity. And so that for me is like a
No,
hard.
I don't view Black as my ethnicity. No.
Okay, so can you
The
restate
Black
what you?
race. Yeah,
Oh,
I think that's what I think you're misunderstanding. um, I said that being a Black American is an ethnicity because we were removed from Africa and we were put here as almost like a restart. We don't have like a real tie to African heritage, traditions, etc., culture. We were descendants of slaves, therefore we're put here, and we weren't even people, we were slaves. Then along the way, we cultivated our own heritage, traditions, and the only way to describe that is Black American, because it describes why we had to cultivate this and why it was necessary, because we were removed and we were stuffed in Black, and also we are American because we were born here. So I do not see my ethnicity as my Black racial identity. Black American is also an ethnic identity. And when I expressed this in the panel, I know Khadijah agreed with it because she was like, yeah, that makes sense, because we were stripped here with nothing. And
yeah,
then they said, you're Black, that's it, and you're a
no.
slave. We're no
So
longer slaves. We're
yeah,
free people. And down the line, we've cultivated all this stuff, and it's Black American heritage.
yeah,
But
no.
I do
So
not tether on, well, race is my
no,
heritage, or race is my,
no,
no.
no. That's
Mm-mm.
not. So I don't misunderstand you. I understand you perfectly well. But I am going to say something that you disagree with, because it's already came out in part one that you disagree with it, and I think it's probably clear, at least to me and probably to the viewers, that you're going to disagree again.
Why
but
would it be clear to the viewers?
I want to make
I don't
clear
think so.
my position, because I didn't push the envelope in our part one. I knew we were gonna like continue the conversation, and so I just I feel compelled to push my envelope and share my thinking about this. So
Yeah.
yes, no, I do understand what you're saying, but the thing that I question and interrogate for my own self, and the thing that I try to encourage people to, I can't force anyone to do anything, right? To question and interrogate, is the inclusion of a word that is tied absolutely to race, whether intentionally or not, and then applying it to describe ethnicity. Now, here's the thing. Yes, there's no disputing. Some people might dispute it, the history of American history, right? But I'm not disputing the history, right? The separation of African descendant people from their cultures, their ethnicities, their nationalities, all of that. Not disputing it. That's a thing that happened, right? It is my position that in addition to not applying race language or anything that's tied to that thing of racialization, it is my position that we shouldn't do that, or that doing it is a sort of misstep, a sort of, it's working against us in ways that we are not intending or anticipating or potentially even prepared to accept, because we're, after all, like many of us are fighting for social justice. And although I do honor and respect and value your position on this, your strong position and your belief that to rename Black American, to like rename it to something else would be a disservice, and sort of diminishing and not doing what we should to honor the people who overcame enslavement and Jim Crow and all that stuff. I hear you and I understand you 100%. But that is not going to prevent me from sharing my viewpoint. So it's my argument, which this is really a new position for me, and it's something I'm still exploring. But it's my assertion that one part of race ideology, because it's racism masquerading, is that it intentionally and unintentionally continues to segregate us, so that in many ways we are segregated in thought and we are segregated in practice. And that the being segregated in thought also includes how, surprise, surprise, American and what it means to be American has largely been defaulted to whiteness, right? So that everyone else that came behind, but even at the same time as America was being founded, everyone else was hyphenated, right? It is, mm-hmm. I align with Elaine Locke's thinking in that one of our goals, it doesn't have to be all of our goals, because some African Americans are segregationists, like for real, they want a Black state, et cetera. That's not what I'm talking about here. Those of us who want to actually be seen as American in America, right, in the context of America, it is my belief that our ethnicity is American, and that just in the same ways I'm arguing to write our power into the language and how we describe ourselves, that comes with writing ourselves into what does it mean to be American without any kind of hyphenation or qualifier. And I think that one thing that's problematic and stands out to be in American society, broadly speaking, is like there's this promotion of this idea that America is a melting pot. But then if it's a melting pot, then why is everyone who's not white hyphenated? And so it is my position that I want to intentionally and strategically write myself into this American thing. And I don't think that all differentiations are negative or nefarious. I think that racism is especially pernicious for reasons that I've shared. And so like I would be open. I also default to describing my ethnicity as African American, as opposed to like Black American. And that's still not a perfect solution, because African American still gets conflated with race, right? So it's like I'm still in the quagmire, but I'm at least feeling like, okay, well, at least I can state explicitly African American ethnicity and all that, and that's a very different thing from race, or at least it should be. So yeah, it's like I want you to hear me when I say like I do hear you, and I can speak, fairly articulately about your perspective, and that I once shared that perspective, but my thinking has shifted and changed to bring me to where I stand now with it. And that brings me back 360 to the start of this conversation. Oh, semantics.
I have some challenge. I definitely think you articulate yourself well. I have pushback. I don't think you articulate my position, no offense, well. Like you said, like like you said, the way that you identify is the way you identify, the way you're eliminativist is the way you're that way. The way I am Black is the way I am. And I still don't think you understand my plight. I think because we share, or you used to share similarities, I guess, with what you might think I think. When you say it, it's not what I think. Because I don't racialize myself, which you've seen, and you're like, wow, like, I'm glad that's something like, positive of this conversation. Like, I don't racialize myself. So when I say Black, I'm bringing context to the situation. I am not racializing my ethnicity,
Oh
if
no.
that's what it is. And also, I'll get back to this other one. I think, no, actually, I'm going to say this. There's two questions. And I asked this question before, and I think you said like you are still would have to think of a word for it or terminology for it. But if it's not called Black American heritage or ethnicity, what would it be called? And I don't see why you would subscribe to African American than Black American, because Black again brings context to the situation, and Black is a part of the history that cultivated the ethnicity. Africa had nothing to do with that. Black did, Africa didn't. So that's why I don't subscribe to calling myself ever as an African American, because I think, like you said, and I want to make sure you said this. Did you say American defaults as whiteness? Correct?
Yeah, like it by countless accounts. The default understanding or the default presumption when one hears American or says American in the context of America, what they're really imagining is like read white American, and everyone else is hyphenated.
That's exactly why I won't say American, because I'm Black American, I'm not white. Also, I wouldn't say African American because that context is not my history. I mean, I might be the descendants from Africa, but that's not, like, I wonder, like, is this because I want to speak for you, because it's your own way to look at Black or being African American. Is it that you've done, like, found a connection or your lineage and like have connected with people in Africa to where it's like, no, I'm African American because like I have ties there. I have heritage there. I know people there, because I mean, I have family there. I literally do. My brother-in-law is from Kenya, and I know 500 to 1,000 people that live in Nairobi that are actually my family. But I wouldn't say I'm African American, because even though part of being Kenyan is in my DNA and ancestry, because I did that test online like 5 years ago. So that is a part of my DNA, but I wouldn't connect myself to it, because the history that happened here is what it is. Like Malcolm and like the Black Panthers and Harriet Tubman and Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement, all of that didn't happen in Africa. That happened in America, but it happened by people that were Black because they were racialized as Black. And that is why I say Black American, because I am paying homage to what they did. I'm not paying homage to race identity. I'm paying homage to the people that fought against my race identity, which is why I'm fully American now, because they fought for those rights for me to be that. So that's why I'm Black American. But like you said, I mean, the way I subscribe myself is fine, because this is my personal take on being Black. And I don't think there is a wrong way to be Black. I say this in my free Black thought piece. There's not one Black narrative. I'm not saying like people have to feel the same way I feel, because I don't think people do feel the same way I feel. I have a personal tailored idea of how I look at my history, of why I think the way I think, of why I can do American Shade, why I write the way I write, the why I have conversations the way I do, the why I want to have this conversation with you, because I think there's 40 million different types of ways to be Black, even if one doesn't subscribe themselves as Black, or to be a Black American in their ethnic sense. Like, so I'm more like individual. Like I don't lay it across the board, which is why I said that you haven't, and you can't, like no one really can. So I'm not saying you can't regurgitate how I feel, because no one can, because it's so personal and tailored to me, to where I understand that you're like, I used to feel the way you feel, but I think because this philosophy and your theory is even new to you, I would leave space to the fact that you might be off sometimes when assuming things, I would say. And I don't mean that in a combative way. I just mean that in a way where, and I'm sure you have this space. So I'm not trying to act like you don't have this space, because obviously you do have this space, because we've talked for months. Had this space for Brittany King to rat off what she wants to talk about. But I would say that I understand why, though, that you say that, because you're like, well, she sounds similar to me, but we're not the same. And we don't view race the same, even though, like you said, we definitely agree on so much stuff, which makes this fascinating for me, which makes this more so why I want to learn, because I'm like, these terms, these philosophies I've never heard, but I'm like some of this and this, and she's this, and we see that. We both don't like the word eliminate. Great. But yeah, that's what I feel. And I think it just speaks to us both wanting to be, or championing for people to be individuals, and not let race do the talking, let people's character do the talking. Yeah, so that's one thing. I just want to be clear on that, because maybe at the end of it, that's the one thing we're just not gonna see eye to eye on. But the thing is we don't have to, and that's the beauty of it, because we all have our own eyes and perspective. And I think something would be lost if we completely were like, we see everything, we're chiseling away everything that our character, what makes us different, and we're like 100% like this. I think the fact that we see things differently is actually good, in my personal opinion. So yeah. And the other things I'm not even going to say, because it's, yeah, they're just questions. But I think you've been very clear with those, so I've got a lot more understanding. But with that, it's a very personal thing, and it's been something that has taken a couple of years to get to. So, and I'm still learning it, you know. But yeah, that's the end of my take.
So yeah, I don't know if I, like, part of me feels inclined to like apologize or something, but the strange part is, as you
don't apologize.
As you were correcting me, you said the same thing that I said.
Did I say correct? Sorry.
Well, no, it's like, as you were correcting me, you didn't say anything different from what I said, but I think what got conflated and potentially confused in my messaging was that you're like, and not to belabor and beat a dead horse, but that unintentionally racializing oneself is what I identify as happening. So I'm not saying that you're doing it intentionally or anything like that. I'm acknowledging and honoring the fact that you are seeing this as subjective, and that you're viewing like Black as an ethnicity versus Black as a race. Like, you're seeing that as separate, and I get it. I get it. Do I disagree with applying a word that's tied to race and therefore racism to oneself in any capacity, yeah, I would disagree because I'm a skeptic. So that's going to be my philosophical position, you know. And then at the same time, I also, you know, hope I expressed throughout our conversations that simply because we differ in terms of level of skepticism, let's say, since you identify as like a partial skeptic, and versus like constructionism, that need not mean that we don't have very much shared end goals, end games. You know, you might kind of maybe be like an eliminativist, a partial one, even you're thinking about it, like who knows. A year from now, my philosophy might shift, right? But like, I just wanted to be super clear just for my own heart, because it was gonna bother me if I left this conversation without saying no. Like, I I I think part of what might make it, and it's my experience, this is my experience, part of what might make it difficult, um, this conversation is difficult because of the subjective part that does come into, especially once we start talking about like ethnicity and culture and all of that, right? That is far more subjective, less objective than defining like racism, anti-racism, yada, 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 the start of the conversation. And I think that a lot of people, and this isn't going to come to as news to you because I know, like, I feel like you know this, right? That a lot of people have difficulty with these kinds of conversations because it can feel so personal. And I think that you and I are no exception to the rule, that when we're talking about something, as soon as we shift to something that definitely feels more personal, then it can be hard to always like truly sit with and necessarily hear what the other person is saying always. And like, I'm not saying that we are the same. I'm also not saying that we're like 100% different, because I don't think that's accurate. I'm not trying to pretend that I'm in your mind and I know your thoughts. I'm not trying to make those kinds of presumptions, but I do think it's important that when it's applicable, that I do speak my truth, just to acknowledge to, not just to you, but anyone who might be viewing, which hopefully people view this video, that I didn't always
click the like button.
I didn't always think about race and myself and my identity and stuff like that in the ways that I'm communicating. And it's still a journey. It's still something I'm navigating. The thing with African American. So yes, like I ran into the wall that many African Americans, or you would have them Black Americans, run into, which is the 1880s. I did run into that wall when I was trying to trace my family. Like, I was building my family tree on Ancestry, right? I did run into that wall. I don't feel connected really with my ethnicities that I found through DNA, Ancestry DNA. I don't feel connected to West Africa in any kind of like not matter of fact way, you know. My grandfather immigrated from Jamaica. I don't feel connected to Jamaica. You know, it's just, that's what it is. The thing that I am actually like giving myself space for as part of my own personal journey is writing myself into America and what it is to be American. The default in how what I call narration writing of America has been defaulting to whiteness, and that's inaccurate and not right. And that's reflective of racism, right? And that's reflective also of systemic racism. And so part of my sort of like personal journey or emotional journey has been coming to that insight and thinking about ways in which perhaps liberation, even if not for a single other human being, but maybe just for myself, part of liberation comes in owning my agency and power and writing myself into that thing that's not supposed to be for me. Because I think ultimately, when I think about doing anti-racist work, that's what I'm thinking about. Is like writing ourselves into that thing that's not supposed to be for us, that we helped build, that we continue to shape and influence and inspire and reconstruct, and all of these things. So for me, that's a meaningful journey. Identifying myself as American is actually more comfortable for me than African American, but that's still a journey. I still am human, and I still feel, some part of me still feels like I have to show some kind of difference from this thing that's American, right? By hyphenating, indeed, like hyphenating myself, or like pointing to this other thing. But part of my journey has also pushed me to think about it in a different way. And I'll give you an example that I think might resonate with some people. I'm not sure. But like, I've been celebrating Juneteenth since I lived in Houston in 2009. And since 2009, especially and onward, I didn't celebrate the 4th of July. And I felt like it was because of the tension that I perceive between like how racialization and racism works and stuff like that. It was hard for me to have or feel a positive connection to America. And that's just where I was. And when I had my children, I felt like pretty strongly that we're going to celebrate Juneteenth in our house, and we're not going to celebrate the 4th of July. And I'm not going to get any kind of patriotic clothes for them. I'm not going to get a t-shirt with an American flag. Like, it's just not going to happen in my house. And I know that they're going to be exposed to it at school and stuff like that. And I guess I'll have to swallow that, but I'm not going to compound that with that. I was uncomfortable with it, and I didn't want to raise my children like that. This year, as I have grown, even since just last July 4th of 2020, shortly before the 4th of July approached, I approached my wife and I was like, listen, I know this has been my position. That's how hard of a position it was, because I spoke with my wife and was like, we're never putting them in patriotic stuff. Like, it's just not happening. No red, white, and blue in this house, right? Like, that's how strongly I felt. So I had to come to her and be like, listen, you know that my thinking, I've continued to develop and stuff like that. And I've identified that, I've identified the irony of like wanting to be in the thing, but then keep also like insisting that I keep myself outside of, and in some ways like detached from the thing. And I don't want to hand that to my children, to our children, I should say, but I don't want to hand that to our children. I recognize how in a lot of ways families pass on this sort of traumatic relationship with the country and stuff like that to their children. And I didn't want to do that to them. I wanted them to experience all of the things that I actually enjoyed as a child, because I celebrated the 4th of July as a child, to kind of, you know, like be innocent, I guess, in some ways, and celebrate Juneteenth and celebrate like all the things and have all these different experiences, and also like be educated and kind of James Baldwin approach of like, I love America and therefore I reserve the right to critique her. That can be a thing. One can actually love one's country and also interrogate or critique and question her, right? And those are the things that I want to impart onto my children. And so I said, bring on the stars and the stripes, bring on the red and blue. And she wasted no time, because Lakeisha is racialized as Black, but she didn't have that same like feeling of tension as I had to the country at whole. And so, yeah, like this year was the first year we dressed them up. We went to her aunt's house and celebrated at a barbecue, and you know, I stopped being stubborn. We went to fireworks and like celebrated and lived life. And so for me, that was a sign of growth, but it's also been a very personal, there's a way in which it has theoretical, practical, you know, broader implications, as you know, my knowledge of African American literature and history tells me that I'm not the first person to like go down this journey, right? And I'm unfortunately I won't be the last person, but like, yeah, like make no mistake, we can be intellectual about all of these things, but at the same time, I don't mean that. I don't want to communicate or have people misinterpret that in intellectualizing these things and even talking about practical application, that there's not a very personal and also subjective thing that happens with all of this, that, and I think that that's why we talk about like leading with love, that's why, I think it takes a lot of effort actually to hold your feet to the fire and stay there even when you're uncomfortable. Like when you were talking most recently, I was like, I had almost like a fight or flight feeling. My body actually
Oh
reacted.
no.
Yeah, no, like not in a bad way, but like just being real with
I
people,
get
because people might, vibe with that. Like I had a fight or flight reaction of like, like, should I stop recording? And is this something that I want to share? Is this a
Ooh.
moment that I want to share? Like what's happening? And I had to force myself to stay and force myself to listen and then force myself to respond in a manner that hopefully gave more context to where I'm coming from, so that you don't walk away feeling like, oh, Sheena's the person who, just because she has a
Oh.
PhD or something, she just
Mm-mm.
assumes that she and
Mm-mm.
I are thinking the same. Like, no, I don't.
No, no, no.
I
Mm-mm.
don't think
I do
that.
not. I do. Yeah.
No, I don't
I
think that.
I do not at all. I'll say this. I'll say two things. One, I really hope you didn't. I did not. This for the viewers. I did not at all feel attacked by her. I did not feel attacked by you at all. I think because I'm having, and I think because I'm having such hard conversations with other people, and I've been doing this to challenge myself. And I said this thing in a tweet. I said, sometimes, not sometimes, it's always good to engage in hard conversations, because it just gives you a bigger muscle of empathy for other people. And also it gives you a bigger muscle to gain like mental maturity, to hear things you don't like and sticking in it, like you said. So one, I want to say I did not feel attacked by you at all. I just want to clarify my point. Two, I'm glad you didn't stop the recording. This is a great example of how difficult conversations can be done. Also, while you're talking, I love that you said the James Baldwin thing. Like, I love this country so much, I must critique her. I literally have that noted here. I know you can't see it, but I have it there. And when you said it, I was like, amen, because exactly. I will say, because of this journey that I've been taking, with re-seeing myself as a Black American, what that means, I have gained that type of defiant love for America. I love this country. I love America. In the same way, not the same way, because it's not the same way in James Baldwin, because it's his own way. But I really, really identify with that quote. Like, I love this country so much. I got to challenge her. I got to critique her. And that is the basis of American Shade. I call it American Shade, people. I mean, come on. I love United States. And I love that you said that, like, okay, now, like, I'm American and I am going to celebrate July 4th. Like, I am going to do that. I'm going to, and pass it on to my kids. And hopefully if they want to do that as well, then yes, but I'm not going to keep that from them, at a young age. I love that. I also have American flag bandana I actually rock sometimes, because
Oh,
one,
I
I'm
think I've
showing.
seen this. Is this your picture on your profile when you log in? I feel like it is. And also on your like audio podcast. I've seen this picture of you in a
It
bandana.
might. I know. I have. Well, it's somewhere over there. I'm gonna get it up. But I have an American flag bandana, and then I was wearing a shirt. I don't know if this could be that podcast picture, but I was wearing a shirt of like Dr. King and like a bunch of different thinkers on it. And I was, and that one, in a way, I was saying Black American, but also like, I'm American, I'm Black, I'm all this, and I'm proud of it. And I am defiantly that way, though. And I find that how I look at being Black American isn't separate from this country. I actually wrote a piece called Letter to My Niece, inspired by James Baldwin, A Letter to My Nephew. And I wrote it to my niece, Sinclair, and I talked about racism and I talked about other things. I said, you know, racism isn't going to be the only thing that you face. There's a lot of other things that you face. And I tie in some things James Baldwin says, but at the end of it, as you know, because I know you read this letter, James Baldwin said you need to love them out of needing you to be their Negro. And then in this piece, I tell my niece, I do not want you to grow bitter to this country when you start learning the history. I don't want you to grow bitter to it. That was history. We progress. I mean, there's definitely things to be bitter about, but I don't want you to hate this country because of certain things that's happened. I want you to be a part of the progression for this country, and love her because she needs us all to be good, right? So when you're talking, I'm like, yes, like, yes, that's how I mean, I feel in a sense. And I just continuously etch in myself in this country, because I am a part of it. And for me, I do celebrate Juneteenth, just because my ancestors commemorated it as a signal of their freedom. I don't really think of it as like, oh, this is when they left American slavery. I think of it, they commemorated it because they were no longer a part of American slavery. They were like, we're free. It's not perfect, but we're free. So I celebrate a little, I do a little type of celebration I can, whether it might just be reading something, a slave narrative, and just remembering like, yes, they did all that. Or actually going to a museum or whatever. And then July 4th, this past July 4th, I went to DC with my brother and then hung out with some friends and watched the fireworks shoot up, like, you know, across, you know, the Lincoln Memorial and all that. Like, and I was in the song was, I'm proud to be an American. Of course, I was singing it horribly, but I was like, I am proud to be an American, like, because at least I know I'm free, like, and tailoring it maybe for myself, but singing along with the crowd, right? Like, I wasn't there like, I'm not gonna, no, I am American. I don't care if anyone's like, well, this is, no, I am. So I love that we share that newness, I guess, with how James Baldwin was like, love her defiantly, and we do. And we're critiquing her because we love her. We're holding her accountable. So as always, and this is no way like wrapping it up, I'm just saying, I love that you did what you did. One, I love that you let me talk and you let me express myself, for one. And I love that you said it, though. I love that you even said, you know, I felt like she's misunderstanding me and she's thinking I'm saying this thing, and man, I think that she might think I'm attacking her. Man, I'm shutting this off because this is not what I want. Like one of the first podcast, no, but this, you don't understand how this is so human. Like, this is a human thing. And people are craving this right now. People are wanting to see what you just said and what we are doing. Obviously, because people are like, part one, yeah, panel, yeah, part two. Like, people love these conversations for the content, obviously, but also because we have, I don't want to say like, oh, we're like courageous and we're fighting, but in a way, this is courageous. In a way, we're talking with each other. And yeah, moments get personal, but for me, I think that's when I want to stick in it. And that's when you stuck in it, because you're like, this is real, this is human. And even if I have to express the moment I felt, I'm not going to end it. I'm not going to press the red button and be like, done. That took courage on your part. And I love that you did that. And I appreciate you sharing that with me. And I'm sorry, like, I'm getting emotional. Like, I'm sorry if you felt that way. That's all I can say. Why am I getting?
No, Brittany.
Like, I feel like I don't want you to think
together.
that.
We can cry together.
Like, because I do not want that to be like, after, maybe it's because I'm like in a weird thankful for this. Like, this is so, I've never cried after. I do this after it's done because I'm like usually exhausted, but I'm doing this now because part one, we just were like, laid it out, panel, like I have watched that probably too many times, because like I'm just fascinated by everyone's thoughts and minds and openness. And then this I was looking forward to, and I love this, and I think this is like the best way for it to end, for people to see like you can do it, like you can have these conversations. It's not easy at all, they're hard, but they're always, like I said, they, no matter what, I'm always thankful I did it. I'm always thankful I did it. And again, I'm thankful for this. Sorry. I am sorry.
No apologies.
It's good. It's good because I'm just like, yeah, I think like this, just the fact that we've expressed ourselves this much and in this way, I hope the viewers really just take this as an example that you can do these conversations. You really can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can do it.
And the worst that might happen is you might cry. And that's okay. And sometimes we need, because sometimes like,
but this is good. This is good tears.
It's a release of something that, you know, that is like necessary at the time. That's how I look at crime anyway. So yeah,
necessary.
I agree, Brittany. I think this is definitely a great place to conclude. It's
you
hilarious.
Talked about your kids. That's why. And I thought about my niece, and I'm like,
it's hilarious because we have, of course, we had other things that we intended to do, but in true Brittany and Sheena fashion, we are at time, and I want to be mindful of time here. So I vote for not even a part 3, but just like another collaboration. I vote for mixing it up, and like maybe we talk about the countless other topics that we could easily talk about.
I love pop culture. If you're into music, movies.
Yes. Like, let's do it. That's the thing that I'll be thinking about the conversation, certainly, but I'll also be thinking about what else, what can we talk about next? Because I'm ready. I'm here for it. I have love for you. I love you. And I respect you and admire you greatly. You have had nothing but really a truly positive impact on me and my thinking, and also my communication skills, and also my like mental toughness that you're kind of talking about, because it can be it conversations like this can get very real in the way that they can get personal, or even feel personal, even if they're not personal, and those kinds of things. So yeah, I'm like so glad that we got to experience this together, and I'm just like, gratitude is really what I'm sending you, truly, because you're really the first person I collaborated with in this new content that I'm producing, and the graciousness and humility that you've approached it. Like, I have nothing but love for you, Brittany, and that's not going to change. Same. I appreciate you so much.
I have love for you, and I'm grateful for this. I'm so thankful you reached out. I'm so thankful that we took the courage to do all this. I really feel like this is going to make a great impact. I think this is evergreen. And I just hope that your subscribers and your viewers, if anything, are like, dang, now whenever things get hard, I'm going to stick with it, because at the end, sure, things can go left, but it didn't go left because we chose for it not to. Like, we chose because we were human and expressed how we felt. And instead of having animosity or passive aggressiveness or anything, you just feel like, I said it and I just said it. That's what you guys do. Say what you mean. Like, say what you actually mean. And everyone's human. Everyone give each other grace. Everyone give each other mercy. And yeah, I love this, and I look forward to the future.
Where can people find you, Brittany, or how should they find you?
Oh Lord. American Shade. I'm sure this will be in the description box, but American Shade on YouTube. You can find American Shade on Spotify. You can find me on medium.com. And then Twitter, Lord, everyone has to do Twitter, I guess. I don't like Twitter, but I'm there. And my handle is King Talissa, and Talissa is spelled Talissa. And Instagram, if you go to my Twitter, you'll see my Instagram too. It's in the bio.
Awesome. Love, light, and liberation to everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.